Hello and welcome to the beauty of human biology. I am your host, Tricia Reid. We're going to be exploring the language of the chakras and understanding that felt experience of being a human. I look forward to our journey together. My guest today is Barbara Condron for part 2.
When I think about Kundalini now, I've been studying this since 1975. So when I think about Kundalini right now, I think about truth. And I think about a practice that has come through all those years of study and application in exploring creative mind, how the mind is creative and when and how. And I'm not talking about brain when I talk about mind. When I talk about mind, I'm talking about the ability to experience beyond the limits of the body and brain. So that, of course, leads us into dream time and what's happening when the brain shuts down or when our awareness shuts off and everything keeps firing and working. And of course, a lot of neuroscience now is going into dream study. And what's very exciting to me, Trish, is that I think the focus this century on dementia, what in the West we call dementia, is actually going to end up marrying the Eastern thought of what has been curated for thousands of years in terms of breath work, in terms of desire, in terms of nature, in terms of who we really are as mind, body, and spirit. So Kundalini actually puts it all together. Kundalini starts becoming stimulated. Let's see, Kund means burn. That's what the root word means. And so you're talking about fire, you're talking about inflammation, you're talking about a lot of things that we're experiencing right now, personally and between us and other people, and on the planet. You look at all the fires, volcanoes erupting. And then, of course, we also have tsunamis and hurricanes. There's always balance in nature. That's the beauty of it. There's not always balance in us as individuals. And we're very sensitive to that because I think that the nature of the human being is to move toward balance, is to realize that that movement is balance. I think that a lot of the illusion that people have about life is that balance means weight scales that are not moving. If there's no movement, there's no life. So in order to have life, there has to be movement. And so balance becomes this wonderful movement of anything, whether it's your physical body, like an exercise. Contralateral movement, of course, is very healthy, and you probably run into that. Breathing, of course, the rhythm of breathing is essential. Coming down to the emotional biorhythm and how it manifests itself in the female anatomy with the monthly cycles of menses. Everything in our nature is toward movement that is balancing. So if we don't resist and if we don't fight it, and if we don't have this inner war going on, which everyone's experiencing that right now, right? So if we choose to see what we're experiencing a little bit differently and see it not so much as a confrontation or as a fight, flight, freeze phenomenon, but as something that takes our gut energies and stimulates our head to think clearer, to think better, to burn through the barriers that we have, then we begin to have what I call intuition. I think that the hara, the lower gut, in the West it's gut, the gut activity, which has a lot to do with COVID, by the way, which you've probably covered, I'm sure.
We have somebody coming who's going to speak to us. She's from Stanford.
Okay.
She's got some amazing, yeah.
Good. Yeah, good. All right. I love that. Yeah. So that lower energy in the hara, which if you know anything about martial arts or if you know about Tai Chi or Qigong, all of those Eastern curations work with the Dantian. And the Dantian has 3 parts. So those 3 parts are actually the integrated chakra system that Kundalini relies upon. Kundalini is a creative energy. It is the most powerful energy in the world. Most animals, all animals have Kundalini. It's the ability to reproduce. Even flowers, in evolutionary movements, flowers reproduce. We can even say that gases reproduce because they form together and they create some new element, that kind of thing. So there's this wonderful evolutionary process that manifests completely. And this is the beauty. You're talking about the beauty of biology. To me, this is it. Okay, so all of it comes in to the human form. And what's really exciting about the fact that we are the combination of gases and minerals and plants and animals and intelligence, that's spiritual and divine, that's the human being, which is an amazing thing. You know, Shakespeare said it, the paragon of animals. It's like he has that wonderful speech, you know, that I think, believe it's in Hamlet. And it's just wonderful about what human beings are, who we are, what our potential is, how we flower. And the flowering is what the chakras are all about. The chakras are the energy transformers. They take what's mental and make it physical, or what's physical and return it back into the mind. That's where we fall short. We don't know how to go home. Kundalini is a way that we can choose to go home through our own abilities to create. So whether we see it, you know, through different cultures, it's talked about all over the world in terms of the Great Spirit and Allah and you know, the grueling intelligence that we're operating within and through, and it's us and it's you and it's between us and it's everywhere, right? And so what is that? How do you even ground that? What does that mean? Well, it means you have the ability to create with thought. You can wake up in the morning and decide, I am going to go to the local cafe and I'm going to have tea before I go into my meeting, my sauna, my work, my wherever we're going to go nowadays. Could be anywhere now. So the park. I'm going to do those things before it ever becomes a reality that we're experiencing as a thought. That's the power of thought. And people just take that for granted. They think, well, yeah, so. But that's also where skyscrapers begin. It's where wonderful children begin before they're ever even here at all. It's where the greatest acts of love and compassion begin. You know, it begins within not so much our heart, really, as an open mind. A mind that's always open, that, you know, it's not prejudicial and turning away people. So Kundalini is the ability for us to even think that way. Without it, we don't have that creative nature to even consider a new idea and then to create it. So the Kundalini energy in animals, most animals have a tail. So the Kundalini energy is the creative energy, the recreative energy, which in biology would be reproductive. So it's this energy that's flowing constantly through the animal and running out the tail. In humans, most humans, yes, there are a few that have been recorded in history. Yes, I give that, right? But most humans, I would say probably 98% of us, don't have tails. Our spinal column ends. There's a collection of energy that works, that's called root chakra. And it grounds us to the earth. And it also is the beginning of the foundation of lifting to the sky. And so a lot of the Eastern disciplines in yoga work with that energy. They describe it. They describe all the energy flows through the body. They describe how the energy moves out, how it moves in. Kundalini is activated by two things, your imagination and your will. So whenever you can imagine something and put the will to it, then you are using that spark of creative energy. So that's, I guess, an introduction in a short shift to Kundalini.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would somebody know if they're feeling Kundalini?
Oh my, all kinds of ways. Sometimes spontaneous movements of Kundalini come through in chills, like you have this thrill that's going up your spine. Sometimes it comes through in blinding kind of lights that you see that aren't physical, but they're in your mind. So they're like sparks of inspiration. Sometimes it comes through in like choirs of angels, and that's even how a lot of people describe it. It's described that way in literature and in poetry, and people will even talk about it, particularly when they come close to death. Or sometimes when we dream, dream states, because dream states and physical death at the end of the physical life are really the same thing. We end up going within the mind into other dimensions. The only difference is we don't come back when we physically die, right? So sometimes it's moments of epiphanies, aha moments. When you begin to study, there's a whole system of yoga called Kundalini yoga. But when you begin to study Kundalini, the way that I recommend to study it is through healing, with healing being the intention. Kundalini, the word, comes from kun, which means burn, but it's also the name of a goddess in Hindu mythologies, Kundala. And that was the way I was introduced to Kundalini, which was very helpful for me because it elevated my thought about what this was that I was working with. That even though it was an energy that's within me that I can call upon at any time, and it is creative, so I can create anything. The way that I was presented that at first was a seed idea that was very important to me because it was presented as this is your healing energy. This is energy that heals. It brings things together. So its essence is love and compassion and mercy. And it is there so that you can not only enhance your life, but more importantly, enhance other people's lives, right? So that made a big difference in how I saw Kundalini from the very beginning. And it has definitely influenced the way that I look at it. So when I would work with students and would teach them about the energy through working with the breath, working with posture, working with the quality of the thinking, and actually creating a healing field, which is part of the discipline and practice. When I would teach people, I would teach them that it is your creative energy to use. You can use it any way you want to create anything you do. That's your responsibility. Once you learn how to use the mind, it's totally up to you. That's one way that I was taught by my teacher to, and he didn't present it this way, but this is what I got from it. The way to recognize someone who doesn't really understand universal laws or truths, or who is a charlatan, a kind of salesman, a spiritual salesman, which we know that there are such things. The way to identify them immediately is an attitude that if you don't use this in a certain way, then I will remove your power. When there's the hint of that, then I would recommend people think again about what they're doing. Myself, I would head out the door. I would say, thank you very much for what I've received, for what you've given, and then I would depart. Because I know that once you learn to do something, whether it's play an instrument or read or whatever, then you have total dominion of that ability. From then on out, it's you.
So is this something that you've seen happen where people have been told their Kundalini powers or learning that and cultivating that could be taken from them?
I think that more what I see now is there's such a shift. This is one of the shifts that's happening right now with us. It's kind of like we're all growing up. And in some ways, I look at all of us and I see that we're somewhere between kindergarten and middle school, in terms of evolutionary development right now. That's really kind of how I see us all. So I have a great compassion for myself and other people. If I don't, then I'm really, it's not a good thing, right? It's really ugly and judgmental. So what I see now is that there's this need to convert, to pivot the energy is what's being used a lot now is pivot. I see it more as a roundabout. In other words, the structure of our highways for years were crossroads, where one road would be going this direction and one here. And so we would need to cooperate when we reach those crossroads, which is a great way to describe relationships with people. We hit crossroads all the time.
Yes.
At every moment. It's like right now you're letting me talk a whole lot and you're listening,
Mm-hmm.
and because that's our dynamic here, right? But it's like if we were in a normal conversation, then I would say some things, you would say some things back.
Yeah.
I would think about that. I would say some things back. So that give and take, that ease of flow of expression is a breathing in and breathing out between people. Mm-hmm. So that's what a crossroads is kind of like. Now we're entering into a time of, sometimes I use a revolving door. But it's like a roundabout. And roundabouts require more intelligence. They require more quick thinking, because the crossroads, you just need to be alert in your body with your senses and know that a stop sign's ahead and all you need to do is stop and wait your turn. And of course, that could be a big learning for some of us, but even so, right?
Yes.
But even so, yeah, but it is simple. When you look at a roundabout, the best way I know to navigate a roundabout is to be able to astral project consciously. And what I mean by that is to be able to hold your attention steady so you are indeed in charge of the wheel of the car, at the same time that you can see it mentally above, so you can see where other people are trying to enter. Because the whole thing with the roundabout is flow. You've got to flow. If you don't flow and you put on your brakes, you've got wrecks, you've got problems, because you interfere with everybody else all the way down the line, right? So that flow in a roundabout is essential. And that's what we're trying to learn right now, individually and collectively, is how do we flow? We need to remember that you still stop at a crossroads, and we will always have those. They won't go away. But you also need to now flow in these roundabout situations. And so, how do we do that inside of us? The way we do it is through consciously using imagination and will and memory. Those three together produce reasoning. Reasoning used over and over produces intuition. It dials everything in through the heart. And that's where we're headed, I think. Kundalini rises up the spine so that you can actually have the energy in your head to make the connections.
So does somebody have to call this or label this Kundalini to be experiencing it?
No, not at all. In fact, it happens all the time. The reality of Kundalini is that when we hit puberty, it becomes active. And so we know it immediately. We know it through hormones. We know it through the neurotransmitters that start going nuts. All of our body lights up in a way that never was possible before. And all of a sudden, we have two sexes, where before the potential was there, but it wasn't active. But once puberty is hit, as we know, all the bodies change. Women become more curvy, all that kind of thing happens. Men become more muscle bound, things like that. And it's just, it's that movement, that in and out movement that literally happens. Kundalini in most people is channeled downward through the reproductive system. So another way that you can know about Kundalini is that you are sexually stimulated by whoever or whatever. So when you have kind of, even sometimes against your will, there are a lot of people who now deal with that greatly, especially with the internet the way it is now.
Right.
So it's really a problem, it really, and they're having a hard time with it, many people, men and women. So that's a new dilemma that we have in our world because of this technology. That's an impetus of Kundalini trying to express itself and reproduce in a physical way.
So, without taking away somebody's personal journey and invitation from life,
Right.
I call that helicopter parenting or forcing others or being domineering. How do we
Those are good words.
support?
That's a good description.
How do we nurture and honor where somebody's at in their own exploration of Kundalini without it leaning too far one way or another?
I think the way that I found is in modeling. Modeling is the best. I think, at this point, and we're seeing it in our schools, and we're going to keep seeing it because everything has moved around, and it won't be the same again. And it's not like there's a new normal. I mean, people like to call it that, but it's like, I think that it's all about super normal now, where we're all going to claim the fact that, yeah, we have higher intelligence and we need to be using it kind of thing. So with my son, he was homeschooled, but he was homeschooled in an intentional community environment. So there were other people who had a great impact upon his life, a number of them, and continually changing people as well because of the nature of the educational system that we were producing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a great deal of experience with that. And I even wrote a book on that called How to Raise an Indigo Child. And it functions on 10 different skills or principles that actually apply across the board. And that book was more about children and working with people from 0 to 7, maybe to 14. Master Living is another book that really was dedicated to just living an adult life. But they're the same skills. They function from 3 basics, which is concentration, meditation, and visualization. Those 3 are what guide Kundalini into action. So when you know that, and one of the best applications of that is dream work. So for instance, with my own son, as well as other children that I lived with and worked with, we would talk about dreams every morning. It would be like a dream circle in some indigenous cultures, where we weren't doing it because it was the history or the narrative necessarily of my life or the other people's lives, but it was the right thing to do. It was the way to inform each other of where we were. It was the way to draw us close together as a group. It was a way for us to communicate about things that are not necessarily seen and yet could be very relevant. And so the dream work becomes an essential part of being able to be creative.
Well,
Connecting.
how do you nurture that memory of the dreams, and how do you cultivate the awareness of recalling the dreams, or how do you cultivate the recall, I guess?
Excellent, excellent question. Part of it is how you go into sleep in the very beginning at night, how you even enter into your sleep, and making sure at these days and times that you don't have technology in your bedroom and that you shut it down at least an hour before you intend to go to sleep. I like to see it shut down around dinner time because it is a big part of my life. So it's part of my work. So I need to use it. And that's the discipline. And it has to be self-discipline. You know, it's not going to shut it off. Well, it could crash, I guess, but it's not going to shut off by itself.
Take it as a gift. Take it as a gift, I promise.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, so making time where with children, if we're going to talk about on that way, and cultivating this in your children, mindfulness really is what it is. Then you talk about the day, you review the day so that they can begin to be grateful for what happened that day. They can talk about things that they didn't like. You know, in other words, they don't take all that and dump it into their sleep, which is going to make them restless, tired. They won't get restored. And if they have dreams, they'll probably be nightmares, right? So you want the best for your child. So what I always did with my child, and he did not want to go to bed, Trish. I mean, he would be up until 1:30
He
because I
just
would read to
loves
him.
you. He just
Yeah,
yes, the
I would
reading.
read to him.
Yes.
I would read to him. Yeah, every night, without fail.
We would do like
His
3 to 5 books. 3 to 5 books. More, Mom, please, more.
Yes, 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 yes. And you know, and being very very mindful and intentional with what you stories you tell them too. It's like I never knew how grim tales were until I started reading them, and I thought I can't read this to myself.
Right. What is this
I
putting
cannot
my
do this.
child's mind, right?
Exactly. So, you know, that was like, oh man, we need new stories.
Mm-hmm.
And that also followed through with Holy Scriptures. It's not that I want to do away with Holy Scriptures in the world. I would never do that because that's where we've come from. And they all agree, really, in essence, and they all tell us the same thing, in essence.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to get beyond the warring, though.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those stories have to do with war. They have to do with fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So that becomes a very important part of our creativity, is coming up with the new millennia, is what I call it,
Mm-hmm.
new stories. And Kundalini is going to help us do that. It's that curating of the creative spirit.
So you mentioned something earlier about where you're noticing human development at right now, or where people are showing up in their reactionary state to what's happening right now.
Yeah.
Through Kundalini, the awareness in that can be cultivated as well.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And
Because right
then
now, for all the questions and the problems that we see that people are waking up to,
mm-hmm.
and I call it a daymare. A lot of people are waking up to a daymare. And you know,
Yes.
yeah. And so it's a matter of interpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like a nightmare, it's a matter of how you interpret what you saw that makes it a nightmare or makes it a solution or makes it a healing. So the interpretation is very important. And that's essential right now with what I hear and see everywhere, is how are we interpreting our own existence and what we see through the net. One of the things that I taught very early on, um, even before it became so obvious now with all the different devices we have and the different feedback, that's probably because of the journalism background that I have. So I have a healthy respect for media, and I have a healthy respect for organized media, and I have a healthy respect for the guy with his camera that's going around shooting everything, thinks that he's a journalist, right? But he's just shooting something that's his opinion. It's up to the beholder to be awake and aware of what you're looking at and to put it into perspective. That's tall order. And you don't do that kind of thinking without using Kundalini. Kundalini is absolutely essential because Kundalini is the whole system. And there's a lot of talk now about systems and systemic, and they're different. They are not the same thing. People need to wake up and get educated about what they're even talking about before they start throwing around words they don't understand. That's kind of crazy when you think about it. And that's where the dream work comes in. Because the dream work, you were talking back to the children for a second. Let's loop that one more time.
Yeah.
Young kids, one of the best things you can do is when they tell you their dreams in the morning, like when they're 2, 4, 6, write it down for them because they don't have the skills yet. So they begin to realize that mommy and or daddy are like a scribe. They are writing, you're literally writing down the holy scripture, truly, of your child, which is, I mean, that's, to me, that's the greatest gift that you can give to your child, because
That's
they will have
beautiful.
it all their life.
Yeah.
The dreams are the soul's autobiography of you. It's your soul's viewpoint on what's going on. So you write it down. So while they're building those skills to write, you have them draw pictures. So if they had a dream, then you have them draw a picture of it. And it may not look like anything that they're saying. Of course it won't yet, but it will in time be the image that goes with the words. And that's what dreaming is all about, is putting those two together so that they match. That to me is honesty. When the images that you have in your mind and the words that you use are describing that image, that's honesty. It may not be truthful, but it is honest as you see it.
I like the differentiation. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It took some years to figure that one out, because I realized that there was a truth as I see it. I was taught that early when I was like 23 or 4. I was asked to do a paper and answer questions. I think there were like 15. And the whole paper was called Truth as You See It. So I even had to think about that. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
Isn't truth truth? And it's like, well, yes, it is. And yeah, it is truth as I see it, because Trish doesn't necessarily look at it the same way I do,
Right.
but we're looking at the same thing, right?
Right.
So that whole reality is not just a thing of you've got your perspective, which is going around a lot now. And it's like, that just means I'm not going to listen to you anymore a lot of the time, right? It's like a breakdown in
Yes.
communication instead of opening up. So
Yeah.
that's not necessarily good. In the event of being able to use the mind, creative mind, then you want to respect its ability to create images and pictures. So then we get into something called synesthesia, which only about 20% of the population even experience. However, it's the future of everybody, because synesthesia is the doorstep to what we used to call ESP. And now we're calling all different kinds of things. It's
Okay.
not that anymore.
So
It's like
grab
now,
what other names it's being confused with so that people know what
yeah,
context to put it in.
a lot of it's being hijacked a little bit by neuroscience. We're talking about neurotransmitters and what's going on in the body and brain.
Okay.
And so we're moving away from the fact that you have inner senses that are compatible with all of your outer senses. For instance, the esoteric talk would be your eyes and what you see. The inner sense is clairvoyance, the ability for clear seeing, which is a mental skill. So there's these inner senses that we are all potentially being able to curate and develop. That then gives us the ability to be intelligent, brilliant, loving, compassionate, tolerant, forgiving, all of these virtues that cultures throughout the world emulate. They see them as valuable to pass them on to their children.
Is it, are you telling us you have seen it possible to cultivate clairvoyance?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I've taught all my life.
Yes. Can
Of
you
my
take
life.
it there?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Um, I did a presentation at the International Association for the Study of Dreams conference in Virginia Beach several years ago. And Virginia Beach is one of its notations is that it is the home of the ARE, the Association for Enlightenment, Research and Enlightenment, that was founded from the work of Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce was a man who was born in, I believe, Hopkinsville, Kentucky, back in the very early 1900s. And he exhibited an exceptional ability for using the inner mind. Some people called it psychic abilities, but I think it was a little bit more intuition myself. I think had a little bit more discipline, a little bit more science to it. And so when I started studying in the 70s, I was studying with a group of people who they were curating that same ability. And so I became what's called an intuitive researcher and reporter early on. By 1977, I was beginning to give reports for people. And so since then, the last 40 plus years, I've given reports on mental health, emotional health, physical health, on being a healing presence, on the idea that there possibly are alternate realities, other dimensions, and other experiences that we've had, and done them in terms of what's significant to the individual now. So the whole reality of intuitive research is very real to me. I'm not the only one that does this. I'm not the only one that's been trained to do this by any means. So that's even more validity in my mind to it because it spreads it out. And the ability to use more of the human potential, which is how I really see it, is the ability to move out of fear, which our cages are being rattled right now, right? So
Yes.
whatever fears you got, they're coming up. Me too. I mean, everybody. And so the whole challenge to meet inside the self. This is how the war moves from being out here to inside, and how then it configures into something much more beautiful. For instance, even grounding it to um, when someone has an illness, and realizing that there are mental and emotional factors that possibly brought the illness on, made the whole ground receptive to it. Because if even if you just look at physically in terms of um, attitudes, if you have maybe you have a heart condition and your doctor has told you that and says, okay, well, if you change your diet and you change your lifestyle, then you don't really have to worry about this. This is manageable. You can do something about this. And for the first 2 weeks, a month, you're pretty pumped about doing whatever you think you need to do, working out, eating green vegetables that you never ate before, whatever, you're really in there with it. You're, not stopping at fast food. You're not getting the snack thing, whatever your vices are, right? Your processed food things. So you're doing really good. You're in your best behavior for a while. And then you start feeling a little bit better. And then, there always comes that time where you've got to reevaluate it. You have to be awake. You have to stay awake, and you have to stay plugged into the higher intelligence that your doctor helped you plug into. If you let go, then you very easily roll right down the mountain. You just fall into the old habits again. So the element of choice there that seems so commonplace, common sense, and yet requires the engagement of a higher intelligence and will to make it continue to go. Without that, then water seeks its level. It will seek back down, to where it pools. And in that pooling, it begins to pool in the mind and the body and eventually creates the blockages, which creates the illnesses or disorders energetically. So that's why energetic work works, but it only works short time.
Mm-hmm.
Its effects are usually 24 hours, sometimes 48. If you're cooperating with it, then it can produce miraculous healing.
So this is what we call the integration after.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
so is this something that you are guiding people through?
Yes, there is a pranic DNA configuration Transfiguration that I have created. That's actually an auditory program that curates not only, it includes yoga nidra. I don't know if you know yoga nidra or not, but
Yes.
it is a process of actually deeply relaxing. And many people use it for sleep, which is unfortunate because it's really meant to completely relax the body so that the mind can freely work. And so you can enter into those meditative, intuitive states and have access to otherwise what you would not have unless you go to sleep. And of course, when we go to sleep, we always risk not bringing it back, not remembering the dreams. So that becomes a dilemma. We get the rest we need, hopefully, that kind of thing, but we don't really preserve the intelligence part of what's there.
So
So
when would
that
be the most effective time to be doing that so you can preserve?
yoga nidra, when you're
Yes.
most awake,
Uh-huh.
not when you want to go to sleep, when you're most awake. So it begins with that. And then it's a systematic way of removing your attention from the senses out in the body and moving them inside to those intuitive senses that we mentioned. And then moving again into microcosmic orbit, which is a Taoist tradition and practice, which does that aligning of the head and the hara. The whole hara lines up between the heart and the gut and the head. And so you have that. And then you move that energy to curate 7 different virtues in you that you identify with. So the whole movement is to cultivate what I call the healing presence, because I believe that everyone is a healing presence. The more that you're aware of it, then the more responsible you are with yourself, but also the higher your calibration. Dr. David Hawkins did some amazing work in that field that I am eternally grateful for and use in much of my teaching and what I work with, because um, his calibrations were number one on 1,000 people, which is phenomenal for science. Most scientific experiments are not that big at all. And so to test 1,000 people to determine what makes the human energy field weak or strong, um, that's amazing. So then he put it all out on a map of consciousness, which you can Google very quickly and find charts and everything else. And so it's widely available. And you can see, once we reach courage, you can see the development of the Hindu systems of yoga, of the chakra systems. You can see the Sephiroth. You can see all the systems within uh, the world in science. It would be the gut brain health and how it's working together now, and heart math. It's all there.